Captain Marcus Hayes had earned every stripe on his uniform through years of sacrifice, discipline, and unwavering dedication to his country. For nearly a decade, he had served overseas in some of the most challenging environments imaginable. His days were filled with missions that tested not only his physical strength, but also his mental resolve. Yet despite all the hardships, Marcus never lost sight of why he joined the military: to protect the freedoms and values America stood for. After months of relentless duty, he was finally granted leave to return home. It wasn't just any ordinary visit. It was an opportunity to reconnect with his family, especially his younger sister, Elena, whom he hadn't seen in years. Elena was thrilled when she heard her brother would be coming home. She immediately started planning how they could make the most of his time off. Knowing how much Marcus loved spending time outdoors and making memories with loved ones, she suggested they go to Pinecrest Amusement Park. The park held special meaning for both of them. It was where their parents used to take them as children during summer vacations. Back then, life felt simpler, carefree, and full of joy. Now it seemed like the perfect place to create new memories together. On the morning of their outing, Marcus woke up early, excited yet slightly nervous about stepping back into civilian life after so long. He dressed casually in jeans and a plain t-shirt, wanting to blend in and enjoy the day without drawing too much attention to himself. However, he couldn't resist wearing his military cap. To him, it wasn't just a piece of clothing. It symbolized everything he had worked for and represented who he was at his core. As he looked at himself in the mirror, he smiled faintly, thinking about how proud his late father would have been to see him now. When Marcus arrived at Elena's house, he found her bustling around the kitchen, preparing snacks for the trip. Her two energetic kids, Sophia, aged 8, and Liam, aged 5, were already jumping up and down with excitement. They adored their uncle, even though they didn't get to see him often. When they spotted him walking through the door, they ran toward him, hugging his legs tightly. Marcus laughed, picking them up one by one and spinning them around until they squealed with delight. For a moment, the weight of his responsibilities melted away, replaced by pure happiness. The drive to Pinecrest Amusement Park was lively. Sophia kept asking questions about Marcus's adventures abroad, while Liam entertained everyone with silly jokes he'd learned at school. Elena chimed in occasionally, sharing stories about what had changed in their hometown since Marcus last visited. By the time they pulled into the parking lot, the atmosphere inside the car was electric with anticipation. The park stretched out before them, its towering roller coasters and colorful attractions beckoning visitors to come closer. Families milled about. Laughter echoed through the air, and the smell of popcorn wafted enticingly from nearby stands. They entered the park. Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him. Everything looked exactly as he remembered it. The bright lights, the cheerful music, and the endless rows of games designed to test your skills. But there was something different this time. He noticed subtle glances from strangers as they passed. Some people smiled politely, while others seemed to stare longer than necessary. At first, Marcus brushed it off, assuming it was because he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to leadership roles. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Their first stop was the Ferris wheel, a classic ride that offered breathtaking views of the entire park. As they waited in line, Marcus leaned against the railing, watching families laugh and take photos together. He marveled at how simple moments like these could bring so much joy. When it was finally their turn to board, Sophia insisted on sitting next to her uncle, leaving Liam sandwiched between his mom and sister. Once the ride began, the world below grew smaller, and for a brief moment Marcus allowed himself to forget about everything else. Up here, surrounded by clouds and sunshine, nothing else mattered. But reality has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. As they disembarked from the Ferris wheel, Marcus noticed a park security guard approaching them. The man wore a stern expression and moved with purpose, his eyes fixed directly on Marcus. Before anyone could say anything, the guard addressed him sharply, accusing him of loitering suspiciously near the entrance earlier. Marcus blinked in surprise, unsure of what to say. He glanced at Elena, who looked equally confused. "I'm sorry," Marcus replied calmly, his voice steady despite the unexpected confrontation. I don't know what you're referring to. I've been here with my family all afternoon. He gestured toward Elena and the kids, hoping the guard would see the absurdity of the accusation. Instead, the man continued to press him, demanding identification and questioning why Marcus was wearing a military cap if he wasn't actively serving at the moment. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain composed. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything, and he didn't want to ruin the day for his family. After showing his ID and explaining that he was on leave, the guard eventually backed off, muttering something under his breath as he walked away. Though the encounter lasted only a few minutes, it left a sour taste in Marcus's mouth. He tried to shrug it off, focusing instead on enjoying the rest of the day with his loved ones. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of what would turn out to be a life-changing experience. Despite the unsettling interaction, Marcus refused to let it dampen his spirits. He bought ice cream cones for everyone and suggested they head to the arcade next. As they played skee-ball and air hockey, the earlier tension faded, replaced by the sound of laughter and friendly competition. For a while, it felt like things might actually go back to normal. But deep down, Marcus knew that the world outside the amusement park wasn't always as forgiving or kind. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that trouble might still be lurking just around the corner. As the afternoon wore on, the amusement park buzzed with energy. The rides roared to life. The games echoed with cheers and groans, and the air was thick with the smell of fried food and cotton candy. Marcus had managed to push aside the earlier, unpleasant encounter with the security guard and focus on enjoying the day with his family. He watched as Sophia tried her hand at a ring toss game, her little face scrunched up in concentration, while Liam clung to Elena's arm, pointing excitedly at the bumper cars. For a brief moment, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by love, laughter, and the simple joys of life. But just as they were lining up for one of the park's most popular roller coasters, a commotion broke out nearby. Marcus turned his head to see what was happening and spotted Elena speaking sharply to a man who appeared to be stumbling slightly. It didn't take long to realize the man was drunk. He had accidentally bumped into Elena while weaving through the crowd, causing her to drop the bag of snacks she'd been carrying. Though it was clearly an accident, the man didn't apologize. Instead, he slurred something unintelligible and smirked, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Elena, usually calm and composed, wasn't about to let the incident slide. She stepped forward, her voice firm but controlled. "You need to watch where you're going," she said, bending down to pick up the scattered items. The man laughed mockingly, his words slurred and dismissive. "Relax, lady," he muttered, waving her off. "It's not like I meant to hit you." Marcus immediately stepped closer, sensing that the situation could escalate if left unchecked. His presence alone seemed to command attention, and the man paused mid-laugh, his bleary eyes narrowing as he took in Marcus's towering figure. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus asked, his tone even but laced with authority. He didn't raise his voice or make any sudden movements. Years of military training had taught him the value of remaining calm under pressure. The drunk man hesitated for a moment, perhaps realizing he'd picked the wrong person to mess with, but instead of backing down, he doubled down, his demeanor shifting from careless to confrontational. "Yeah, actually, there is a problem," he sneered, pointing a shaky finger at Marcus. "What are you gonna do about it, huh? Big tough guy, with your army hat." At first, Marcus thought the comment was nothing more than drunken bravado. People often made assumptions based on appearances, and he was used to being judged for his size, his posture, or even the way he carried himself. But then the man leaned in closer, his voice dripping with venom, and added, "Or maybe you're just pretending to be brave because you're compensating for something. You know, being black and all." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Not because they hurt, but because they were so utterly baseless. Racism wasn't new to him. He'd faced it before, both in subtle ways and overt ones. Growing up, he'd learned to navigate those moments with grace and resilience, choosing not to let ignorance define him. But standing there in the middle of an amusement park, Surrounded by innocent families and children, the blatant prejudice felt jarring and out of place. This wasn't a war zone or a hostile environment. It was supposed to be a safe space for fun and relaxation. Marcus clenched, his jaw, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to retaliate, to call the man out for his bigotry and force him to confront the ugliness of his own words. But another part, the wiser, more disciplined part, knew that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. He glanced at Elena, who was glaring daggers at the man, and then at Sophia and Liam, whose wide eyes reflected confusion and fear. Whatever happened next, he couldn't let it spiral out of control. "Let's go," Marcus said quietly, placing a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "This isn't worth it." His voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was an underlying firmness that brooked no argument. Reluctantly, Elena nodded, grabbing the kid's hands and stepping back. Marcus followed, casting one last glance at the drunk man, who was now laughing obnoxiously and muttering to himself. As they moved away from the scene, Marcus hoped the confrontation would end there. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to them, a local police officer named Deputy Ryan Caldwell had been observing the exchange from a distance. Caldwell was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a reputation for being quick to judgment and slower to listen. Over the years, multiple complaints had been filed against him for using excessive force, particularly when dealing with minority individuals. Yet, despite these allegations, he remained on the force, his badge a shield that protected him from accountability. Caldwell hadn't witnessed the initial bump or heard the drunk man's racial slur. All he saw was a large black man standing toe-to-toe with a white civilian, and in his mind that was enough to jump to conclusions. Without hesitation, he strode over to Marcus, his hand resting conspicuously on the holster of his gun. "Hey, you," Caldwell barked, his voice cutting through the noise of the park. "Stop right there." Marcus froze, turning slowly to face the officer. "Sir?" he replied, his tone respectful but cautious. "Is there a problem?" "You tell me," Caldwell snapped, his eyes narrowing. "I saw you getting aggressive with that guy back there. What's going on?" Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned by the accusation. Aggressive? He had done nothing but try to defuse the situation. Before he could respond, the drunk man staggered over, clearly emboldened by the arrival of law enforcement. "Yeah, officer," he slurred, pointing at Marcus. "This guy was threatening me, totally out of line." Caldwell barely glanced at the man before nodding curtly, as if his word was gospel. Without asking for Marcus's side of the story or investigating further, he reached for his radio and called for backup. Then, without warning, he drew his weapon and pointed it directly at Marcus. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby. Visitors' time seemed to slow down. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, but his training kicked in. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands above his head, palms open to show he posed no threat. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. He, a decorated army officer, who had risked his life countless times to protect others, was now being treated like a criminal in broad daylight. Around him, the cheerful atmosphere of the amusement park dissolved into chaos. Parents grabbed their children and pulled them away while others whipped out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Elena screamed, her voice trembling with panic. "What are you doing? He didn't do anything wrong," she cried, clutching Sophia and Liam tightly. Her pleas fell on deaf ears as Caldwell ignored her completely, keeping his focus, and his gun, trained on Marcus. For a few agonizing seconds, Marcus locked eyes with the deputy, searching for some sign of reason or humanity. But all he saw was cold indifference. "I'm a U.S. Army captain," Marcus said evenly, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the moment. "I was just trying to protect my family. You don't need to point a gun at me." Caldwell scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "That's not for you to decide," he shot back, his finger still resting dangerously close to the trigger. "Now shut up and get on the ground." The command sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. Some people gasped audibly while others whispered among themselves, horrified by what they were witnessing. Marcus hesitated for a split second, torn between compliance and disbelief. How had this escalated so quickly? 1 minute he was enjoying a carefree day with his loved ones, and the next, he was staring down the barrel of a gun wielded by someone who was supposed to uphold justice. Ultimately, Marcus chose to comply. Lowering himself slowly to his knees, he kept his movements deliberate and non-threatening. As he did, Elena frantically searched her purse for her phone, pulling up photos of Marcus in uniform to show the growing number of bystanders. "Look at this," she shouted, holding up the screen. "This is who you're treating like a criminal. He's a hero." Her words resonated with many in the crowd, and murmurs of disapproval began to spread. Someone called out, "He hasn't done anything wrong." Another added, "Put the gun down." The tension was palpable, a volatile mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. Meanwhile, video footage of the incident flooded social media platforms, sparking outrage far beyond the confines of the amusement park. Backup officers arrived shortly after, but instead of calming the situation, they only made it worse. Ignoring the mounting evidence, including the recordings and eyewitness accounts, they proceeded to handcuff Marcus and lead him away. As he walked past his sister and nieces, his expression remained stoic, though his eyes betrayed the storm raging. Inside him, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the America he had sworn to defend. The amusement park, once a sanctuary of joy and innocence, had transformed into a battleground, a stark reminder of the systemic inequalities that still plagued society. And as Marcus disappeared into the back of a police car, he vowed silently that this wouldn't be the end of the story. If anything, it was just the beginning. The scene at Pinecrest Amusement Park had transformed from a place of laughter and joy into something out of a nightmare. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, the crowd that had gathered continued to grow restless. Parents clutched their children tightly, shielding them not just from the chaos but also from the harsh reality unfolding before their eyes. Some people shouted protests, demanding an explanation for why a decorated army officer was being treated like a criminal. Others stood frozen, their phones held aloft as they recorded every moment, ensuring the world would see what had happened here. Elena, still holding Sophia and Liam close, felt a mix of emotions: fear, anger, and helplessness, all swirling together in a storm she couldn't contain. Her brother, her hero, was being dragged away for no reason other than the color of his skin. She refused to let it end there. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and began showing the officers photos of Marcus in uniform, medals gleaming on his chest during formal ceremonies, and moments captured with his unit overseas. "This is who you're accusing," she yelled, tears streaming down her face. "He's served this country for years. How can you treat him like this?" But the officers ignored her, brushing off her pleas as if they carried no weight. They didn't seem interested in hearing about Marcus's sacrifices or understanding the context of the situation. Instead, they focused solely on following orders, even if those orders were based on prejudice and misinformation. The deputy who had drawn his gun on Marcus, Deputy Ryan Caldwell, stood nearby, his expression smug and unapologetic. He barked commands into his radio, calling for additional backup as though he were dealing with a dangerous fugitive rather than a man who had done nothing wrong. As word of the incident spread through the park, more people started stepping forward to voice their outrage. A group of teenagers who had been recording the confrontation uploaded the footage online almost instantly, tagging hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "Systemic Racism Exposed." Within minutes, social media platforms lit up with posts about the incident. Comment sections filled with messages of support for Marcus, while others condemned the actions of the police. The amusement park, once a symbol of carefree fun, became the epicenter of a national conversation about racial bias and law enforcement accountability. Meanwhile, inside the police car, Marcus sat quietly, his mind racing. He had spent years training to stay calm under pressure, whether in combat zones or high-stakes missions. But nothing could have prepared him for this. A day meant for family bonding turned into a public spectacle of injustice. His thoughts drifted to his parents, both of whom had passed away before seeing him rise to the rank of captain. Would they be proud of how he handled this situation? Or would they feel disappointed that such prejudice still existed in the world they had worked so hard to make better? Despite the turmoil inside, Marcus maintained his composure. He knew losing control wouldn't help anyone, not his family, not himself, and certainly not the cause of justice. When the police car finally arrived at the station, Marcus was escorted inside without ceremony. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he was processed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. For someone who had faced enemy fire and survived treacherous conditions abroad, sitting alone in a cold, sterile room felt oddly surreal. Yet it was here, in this quiet space, that Marcus allowed himself to process everything that had happened. Hours passed before a lawyer arrived, courtesy of a veterans advocacy group that had caught wind of the incident online. The attorney introduced herself as Ms. Harper, a seasoned civil rights lawyer known for taking on cases involving police misconduct. She listened intently as Marcus recounted the events of the day, asking thoughtful questions and jotting down notes. By the time she finished gathering details, her expression was grim. "What happened to you today is unacceptable," she said firmly, "and we're going to fight back." With Ms. Harper's intervention, Marcus was released later that evening, pending further investigation. As he stepped out of the station, he was greeted by a sea of cameras and reporters. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, ready to broadcast the story live. Elena rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus hugged her back, offering what little reassurance he could muster. "It's not your fault," he told her softly. "We'll get through this together." The next few days were a whirlwind of media appearances, interviews, and public statements. Marcus remained composed throughout, speaking clearly and deliberately about the need for systemic change within law enforcement. He emphasized that his experience wasn't unique, it was part of a larger pattern of discrimination faced by countless individuals across the country. His words resonated deeply with audiences, sparking discussions about implicit bias, racial profiling, and the urgent need for reform. Behind the scenes, however, Marcus struggled to come to terms with the emotional toll of the incident. Though he appeared strong and resilient in public, privately he found himself replaying the moment when Deputy Caldwell had pointed a gun at him. The memory haunted him, dredging up feelings of vulnerability and frustration. He confided in Ms. Harper during one of their strategy sessions, admitting that the encounter had shaken his faith in the very system he had dedicated his life to protecting. "How do I explain this to my nieces and nephews?" he asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "How do I tell them that sometimes the people meant to keep us safe are the ones causing harm?" Ms. Harper nodded sympathetically, acknowledging the weight of his burden. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," she said gently. "What matters is that you're using your platform to shine a light on these issues. That's already making a difference." Indeed, the impact of Marcus's story was undeniable. Activists, community leaders, and even politicians began citing his case as an example of why reforms were necessary. Protests erupted in cities nationwide, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "Protect our heroes" and "No justice, no peace." Veterans organizations rallied behind Marcus, organizing fundraisers to cover legal fees and raising awareness about similar incidents affecting service members. Even some law enforcement agencies issued statements condemning the actions of Deputy Caldwell, though many critics argued that words weren't enough. They needed action. As the weeks went on, the investigation into the incident intensified. Internal Affairs launched a probe into Caldwell's conduct, reviewing body cam footage, witness testimonies, and the viral videos that had circulated online. What they uncovered was damning. Caldwell had a history of discriminatory behavior, including falsified reports and excessive use of force against minority individuals. Several past complaints had been swept under the rug, allowing him to continue serving despite clear red flags. Public pressure mounted, forcing local officials to take swift action. Caldwell was suspended without pay, and calls for his termination grew louder with each passing day. Meanwhile, the department announced plans to implement sweeping reforms, including mandatory anti-bias training, stricter oversight measures, and the establishment of a civilian review board to hold officers accountable for misconduct. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast in his resolve. While he appreciated the support pouring in from strangers and allies alike, he knew the fight was far from over. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but every step forward mattered. And as he stood alongside his sister and her children, watching the sun set over their hometown, Marcus allowed himself a small measure of hope. Maybe, just maybe, his ordeal would inspire others to speak out against injustice and work toward a brighter, fairer future. For now, though, he focused on healing, both for himself and for his family. The amusement park had become a symbol of resilience rather than fear, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and unity could pave the way for progress. The weeks following the incident at Pinecrest Amusement Park were a whirlwind of activity for Marcus Hayes. His story had gone viral, sparking outrage and calls for justice across the nation. Every news outlet seemed to be covering the case, from local newspapers to national television networks. The hashtag #JusticeForMarcus trended on social media platforms for days, accompanied by heartfelt messages of support, personal stories of discrimination, and demands for accountability. For Marcus, it was overwhelming, not just because he was thrust into the spotlight, but also because he realized how deeply his experience resonated with so many others. Despite the outpouring of support, Marcus couldn't ignore the emotional toll the ordeal was taking on him. He had always prided himself on being strong, disciplined, and unshakable, qualities that had served him well in the military. But this situation was different. It wasn't an enemy combatant or a battlefield injury he was dealing with. It was something far more insidious, the erosion of trust in institutions meant to protect him. At night, when the house was quiet and his family slept, Marcus would sit alone in the living room, replaying the events of that day over and over again in his mind. The sound of Deputy Caldwell's voice shouting commands, the cold metal of the handcuffs against his wrists, the fear in Sophia and Liam's eyes as they watched their uncle being led away. These memories clung to him like shadows, refusing to fade. During the day, however, Marcus channeled his energy into action. With the help of Ms. Harper, his lawyer, he filed a lawsuit against both Deputy Ryan Caldwell and the police department. The lawsuit wasn't just about seeking compensation for what happened. It was about holding individuals accountable and pushing for systemic change. Marcus knew that one bad apple like Caldwell didn't exist in isolation. He was part of a system that allowed such behavior to persist unchecked. By filing the lawsuit, Marcus hoped to expose those cracks in the foundation and demand reforms that would prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. The legal process was slow and grueling, filled with depositions, document reviews, and endless meetings. Marcus spent hours poring over evidence with Ms. Harper, reliving every painful detail of the encounter at the amusement park. It was exhausting, but he refused to give up. Each piece of evidence they uncovered painted a clearer picture of Caldwell's misconduct. Internal affairs reports revealed multiple complaints against him, ranging from racial profiling to unnecessary aggression during arrests. Body cam footage from other officers who responded to the scene showed Caldwell escalating the situation, without provocation, ignoring Marcus's calm demeanor and repeated attempts to explain himself. Even eyewitness accounts corroborated Marcus's version of events, describing him as composed and non-threatening throughout the entire ordeal. As the investigation progressed, public pressure mounted. Protesters gathered outside the police station daily, holding signs that read "Accountability Now" and "Protect Our Heroes." Veterans organizations organized marches in major cities, drawing attention to the broader issue of systemic racism within law enforcement. Local politicians, eager to distance themselves from the controversy, called for transparency and swift action. The mayor issued a statement promising a thorough review of police practices, while state representatives introduced legislation aimed at increasing oversight and implementing mandatory anti-bias training for all officers. Amidst the chaos, Marcus found solace in small moments of connection. Neighbors stopped by to offer words of encouragement, leaving home-cooked meals and handwritten notes on his doorstep. Strangers sent letters sharing their own experiences of prejudice and thanking him for speaking out. One letter, written by a young boy named Jamal, stood out to Marcus. In simple, heartfelt language, Jamal described how seeing Marcus stand tall despite everything gave him hope that things could get better. "You're my hero," the boy wrote. "I want to grow up and be brave like you." Reading those words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. He realized that his fight wasn't just for himself, it was for everyone who felt marginalized or powerless. If sharing his story could inspire even one person to believe in the possibility of change, then it was worth every sleepless night and every difficult conversation. Meanwhile, Elena played a crucial role in supporting her brother through the process. She attended every meeting, took detailed notes, and helped manage the flood of media requests. More importantly, she ensured that Marcus didn't lose sight of why he was doing this. "You're not just fighting for justice," she reminded him one evening as they sat together on the porch. "You're fighting for our kids, for their future, so they don't have to go through what we've been through." Her words struck a chord with Marcus. He thought about Sophia and Liam, whose innocence still shone brightly despite the ugliness they had witnessed. They deserved a world where they could walk into any amusement park, or anywhere else, without fear of being judged or mistreated because of the color of their skin. That vision became Marcus's driving force, propelling him forward even when the weight of the battle threatened to overwhelm him. Finally, after months of painstaking work, the trial began. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and supporters eager to witness the outcome. Marcus sat stoically next to Ms. Harper, listening intently as witnesses testified and evidence was presented. Caldwell took the stand, attempting to justify his actions by claiming he had followed protocol and acted in self-defense. But under cross-examination, his arguments crumbled. Ms. Harper skillfully dismantled his testimony, exposing inconsistencies and highlighting his history of discriminatory behavior. By the time closing arguments rolled around, it was clear that the tide was turning in Marcus's favor. When the verdict was announced, the room erupted in cheers. Caldwell was found guilty of misconduct and stripped of his badge, a rare victory in cases involving police brutality. The judge ordered the department to implement sweeping reforms, including stricter hiring standards, ongoing diversity training, and the establishment of a civilian oversight committee to monitor officer conduct. While the ruling couldn't undo the trauma Marcus had endured, it marked a significant step toward accountability and progress. Outside the courthouse, Marcus addressed the crowd that had gathered to celebrate the victory. Standing tall in his military cap, he spoke with conviction and humility. "This isn't just my win, it's a win for everyone who has ever felt silenced or dismissed because of who they are," he said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "We still have a long way to go, but today proves that change is possible if we stand together." His words echoed through the streets, inspiring cheers and applause. As he stepped down from the podium, surrounded by loved ones and allies, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and the scars of that day at the amusement park would always remain. But for now, he felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder that courage, resilience, and unity could light the path toward a brighter future. The months following the trial verdict were transformative, not just for Marcus Hayes but also for the community he had inadvertently galvanized. The guilty verdict against Deputy Ryan Caldwell sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide, sparking debates about accountability, bias, and the urgent need for reform. For Marcus, however, the victory wasn't just about punishing one bad actor. It was about creating lasting change that would prevent others from enduring similar injustices. In the wake of the trial, Marcus became a symbol of resilience and hope. Invitations poured in from organizations across the country asking him to speak at conferences, rallies, and schools. At first, he hesitated. Public speaking didn't come naturally to him. He was more comfortable leading by example than standing in front of a crowd. But Elena encouraged him, reminding him of the impact his words could have. "People are listening now," she told him. "You can use this moment to inspire them." With her support, Marcus began accepting invitations, traveling to cities, where communities were grappling with issues of racial inequality and police misconduct. His speeches were simple yet powerful, rooted in personal experience rather than political rhetoric. He spoke openly about the day at Pinecrest Amusement Park, the fear, the anger, and the frustration, but also about the importance of staying calm and focused in the face of adversity. "I didn't choose to be put in that situation," he often said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I chose how I responded. And I chose to fight back, not with violence or hatred, but with truth and courage." His message resonated deeply with audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Veterans saw themselves in his story, nodding along as he described the challenges of returning home only to face prejudice. Young people found inspiration in his determination to turn pain into purpose. Parents brought their children to hear him speak, hoping they could learn from his example of grace under pressure. Everywhere he went, Marcus left an indelible mark, planting seeds of hope and resolve. Back in his hometown, the ripple effects of the case continued to unfold. The police department implemented the reforms mandated by the court, but community leaders pushed for even more comprehensive measures. A coalition of activists, educators, and faith-based organizations formed a task force dedicated to fostering trust between law enforcement and minority communities. They organized workshops, town hall meetings, and mentorship programs aimed at bridging divides and promoting understanding. Marcus played an active role in these efforts, sharing his insights and lending his voice to initiatives designed to create meaningful dialogue. One of the most impactful projects was a youth leadership program Marcus helped develop alongside local schools and veterans groups. Called Courage to Lead, the program taught students skills like conflict resolution, teamwork, and public speaking while emphasizing values such as integrity, empathy, and perseverance. Marcus took a hands-on approach, volunteering his time to lead workshops and mentor participants. Watching kids like Sophia and Liam engage with the program filled him with pride. Seeing them grow into confident, compassionate individuals gave him a renewed sense of purpose. For Marcus, though, healing wasn't something that happened overnight. Even as he worked tirelessly to drive change, the emotional scars of the amusement park incident lingered. Some nights he still woke up in a cold sweat, reliving the moment when Deputy Caldwell pointed a gun at him. Other times he caught himself, feeling uneasy in crowded places, hyper-aware of glances or comments that reminded him of that day. But instead of letting those feelings consume him, he channeled them into action. Therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in trauma helped him process his emotions, while journaling provided an outlet for reflection. Slowly but surely, he began to reclaim pieces of himself that he had feared were lost forever. Elena noticed the shift in her brother over time. Gone was the quiet tension that had settled over him after the incident. In its place was a renewed sense of optimism and a deeper connection to his family. On weekends, Marcus made it a point to spend quality time with Sophia and Liam, taking them fishing, hiking, or simply playing board games at home. He encouraged them to ask questions about his experiences, answering honestly but always framing his responses in a way that empowered rather than frightened them. "The world isn't perfect," he told them one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "But we can make it better if we stand up for what's right." As the years passed, Marcus's influence extended far beyond his immediate circle. The lawsuit and subsequent reforms inspired similar cases across the country, giving other victims of police misconduct the courage to come forward and demand justice. Lawmakers cited his story when drafting new legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in law enforcement. Schools incorporated his speeches into civics curriculums, using his journey as a case study in resilience and advocacy. Even Hollywood took notice, optioning the rights to adapt his story into a film. A project Marcus approached cautiously, ensuring it stayed true to the spirit of his mission. Despite the accolades and recognition, Marcus remained grounded. To him, the real measure of success wasn't headlines or awards, it was the tangible difference he could see in his community. Crime rates dropped as trust between residents and police improved. More young people joined programs like Courage to Lead, learning to channel their energy into positive action. Conversations about race and privilege became less taboo, opening doors for honest dialogue and mutual understanding. On the anniversary of the amusement park incident, Marcus returned to Pinecrest with his family. The park looked much the same as it had that fateful day, but the atmosphere felt different. Families laughed and cheered without a hint of tension in the air. As they walked past the spot where the confrontation had occurred, Marcus paused for a moment, reflecting on how far they had come. Then, with a smile, he turned to Sophia and Liam. "Ready for some roller coasters?" he asked, his voice light and playful. They spent the rest of the day enjoying rides, snacks, and laughter, exactly as they had planned all those years ago. For Marcus, it was a reminder that life wasn't defined by the hardships we face, but by how we rise above them. The amusement park, once a place of fear and injustice, had become a symbol of resilience and renewal, a testament to the power of courage, unity, and unwavering determination. That evening, as they drove home beneath a sky painted with streaks of orange and pink, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, and challenges would undoubtedly arise. But armed with the love of his family, the support of his community, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of change, he knew they could overcome anything. After all, every step forward, even the smallest one, brought them closer to the future they dreamed of. A world where everyone, regardless of their background, could live with dignity, respect, and hope.